Wet, 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 love is all around. A song which conjures up scenes from Four Weddings and a Funeral. It famously featured on the soundtrack. Much of Four Weddings and a Funeral filmed locally in the three counties as well. The Scottish band stormed the charts in the late 80s and landed a string of hits, which included Goodnight Girl, written by bassist Graeme Clark. Graeme decided to leave the band to pursue a solo career, and he was also faced with a battle against drink and drug addiction. But it didn't take long for Wet, Wet, Wet to reform. Graeme is still working on his own music, and he's heading to the three counties, guitar literally in hand, because you've got it in your hand, Graeme.
I have, yes, I have indeed, yeah.
You're going to play live for us later on. You're playing at the Stables in Wavendon on May the 9th. We'll give out full details as to how my listeners can get hold of tickets for that. When I talk to musical guests like yourself, I often go back to the very beginning, and that beginning takes us more often than not to parents. In your case, though, we have to probably go a generation further back, don't we, to discover the man who really influenced you. Your granddad sounds like quite a character.
Oh, Grandpa, yeah, he was a big part of my formative years early on, and my mother used to go down and clean his flat, and he had an old piano in his back room, and so my earliest recollection is looking out the back window of the tenement in a place called Yoker, which is on the outskirts of Glasgow, watching ships go by, and basically banging notes on the piano, and he was a big major influence on me musically, and much more than I thought. And recently I looked back into his army history, because he was in the First World War and the Second World War, which seemed a bit strange to me that his life spanned the two great wars, but on looking back, he had a skill set in 1939 that they required, and so he was out there. He was out at the Battle of France, which, as I'm finding out more and more, is this kind of mental battle that happened out in France when the Second World War started. So yeah, looking back, and who doesn't like to look back in their history? It's one of these things that just fascinates me, and there's lots of programmes about it, and I'm no different. When I started looking into it, I thought there might be something interesting, but it shocked me that there's so much there,
I've read a number of interviews where you've talked about the sense of balance that learning your granddad's story and history has given to your own career. He wanted to be a musician but couldn't. Is there a part of you that feels that you're almost playing out what he wasn't able to do?
Well, certainly that springs to mind now, but at the time, I think, I grew up in the sort of 80s, certainly when I was a teenager I grew up then, and luckily the climate, the social climate around then, there was no jobs, so I mean, it enabled me and a couple of like-minded buddies to just sit around and try and learn our craft and write songs, and it was looking back now, I see how much it kind of formed me, being sort of exposed to his musicality, and I think as well, my mother was certainly a big supporter, and I think she saw through her father not being able to do that. And he was a handy musician, he played a lot, he was a multi-instrumentalist, and a fairly talented guy who ended up, as you say, he couldn't really be a musician because it wouldn't pay, so he went off and did something else, and in a funny way, it enabled me to do what I'm doing today,
It's funny because, talking of funny, people often say to me, and I'm sure they say to you as well, that we're brave to do what we do. It's brave to go on stage in front of 50,000 people, or it's brave to talk on the radio, and yet when you look at your granddad and what he did, that must have redefined bravery for you.
It did, and I don't want to go down the road of, the good old days, and it was better, they were braver, they were better people, and blah, 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 because it's different now, but, I think of the things that worry me, and sort of, in a sense that I bother about today, and they're absolutely nothing compared to what, the hardships that they had to endure, and certainly, his life, he loved music, and for me it was passed right on to me, and it's kind of right through me now, and yeah, I mean there was hardships in our life, don't get me wrong, certainly growing up in the 80s, I left school the factory closed basically, and in Clydebank where we grew up, usually the schools would open and the shipyards would open, and all the school leavers would go into the shipyards, and that stopped happening round about early 80s, early to mid 80s, and in a weird sort of way, it enabled us to go and do what we did, and I'm still on this journey, Because
that's the funny thing, and I mean, you clearly have a very broad Glaswegian brogue in your voice, and you look at that area, Clydebank to the north of Glasgow, areas like East Kilbride to the south. I know there is a bit of a north-south divide,
yes.
but you look at the creative talents that came in the 80s out of that area when clearly the area was struggling hugely, economically and socially. You look at Alan McGee and all the Creation Gang and Bobby Gillespie that came out of East Kilbride, you yourselves coming out of sort of North Glasgow. There's no doubt that those environments and those periods in time are actually very good for creative art, aren't they?
They are, yeah, and that's the thing, it enabled us to turn to art, and I think even maybe 10, 15 years before that, people wouldn't have saw a viable option in creative arts, whereas at that time, I think as well, Glasgow's star was rising in a sense in the 80s, where Glasgow had a kind of a bad reputation, in as much that it started in the 40s and 50s, and the Barrowlands and the gangs and the Razor gangs and all this sort of thing, and when a city gets a reputation, it becomes hard to shake it. But during that 80s when, there was a whole kind of renaissance of Glasgow, and, people started looking at the buildings and not saying, hey, this is a dark, dreary, wet city. They started looking at it and saying, actually, this is a fairly looking, a serious looking, architecturally, important city. And so we and a lot of other people get caught up in that crest of a wave, and it took us right up there, and suddenly we became poster boys for Glasgow to an extent, and we're thankful for it. Glasgow certainly gave me, it's who I am,
And that we is Wet Wet Wet, who we haven't even touched on yet. We'll talk about we'll talk about the formation of Wet Wet Wet, and of course Graeme will be singing live for us as well after 2:30. He's on the road as part of his brand new solo tour. My guest in the studio, Graeme Clark, plays the Stables in Wavern. And Graeme, were you ever asked to do Eurovision as part of Wet Wet Wet?
We sort of got intimated to us that they would be willing to listen to something if we contributed, but I never really grew up. We grew up with Eurovision obviously, but it wasn't really something that I gravitated or went towards. It's and it's fine. Good luck to Molly. Hope she does well. It looks to me it's a bit of a poison chalice. You've kind of, as we talked about, you've no chance of winning, and there seems to be a lot of politics involved in it,
There's no doubt that it is very, very hard to even get points when you're singing for us in Eurovision. Listen, we have to talk about Wet 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 themselves, of course. Yes, a major part of your life. When you formed, did you immediately know that Marty Pellow had everything that a star could need? The good looks, the charisma, the voice?
No.
Really?
No, I'm being slightly facetious here. I mean, yeah, we were lucky. It was kind of, the stars kind of aligned in 1984 when we all walked into Clydebank High School, and, my mate was a drummer. My other friend was a keyboard player. I played guitar and bass, and Marty sang, and it's sort of, in a sense, that's the way it happened.
Did you immediately know that he was going to be a heartthrob?
I kind of knew he was nearly as good looking as I was. Yes,
and that was a close call, in fairness, Graeme.
Absolutely, yeah. But I think what I did realise was that if we wrote a couple of good songs, we had the ingredients that's needed in order to go and sell some records. So. And when I heard his voice, it was kind of obvious that he had his voice had a massive personality even before you saw what he looked like. So. Yeah, I mean, I was kind of, the arrogance of youth. We thought, yeah, we're gonna do something, and that carries you a long way.
Did you know that you could write songs?
Well, not really. No, it was kind of, there was a few people around me at the time, and it was actually watching them, and I felt that they wrote better songs than I did, and I kind of you know, for wanting a better phrase, I kind of copied them and looked at how they wrote songs and what they were doing, and that's how I learned to do it, you know.
Nothing wrong with that.
No, and I think, you know, even at that point, you know, there was a lot of, it was a post-punk kind of time, and anyone could pick up a guitar, anyone could play, you know, that was the whole point of it. And so it was a means for us to express ourselves, you know. And the fact of the matter was, it was obvious that we could never have been a punk band with a guy like Marty fronting it. So it forced us into kind of trying to write songs around that, you know.
He was many things, Marty Pellow. A punk, I don't think, was one of them. I spoke to Henry Priestman recently about his work with the Christians, and he basically wrote all their hits in effect, but no one ever really recognised him in the street, and he told me that kind of suited him. How did you feel about being, obviously you didn't write everything, but you were a huge creative force in the band, and yet all the focus was very much on Marty?
Yeah, I mean, I think in bands, and especially a big pop act, you know, it's you know, we sort of shared everything equally, you know, but when it went out there, the fame wasn't shared, you know what I mean? It was you know, and I think as a younger person, you know, it did kind of knock my ego a bit, and you know, I can't deny that, you know, I would like to go into a restaurant and people to recognise me and give me the best table there, you know.
Be swooned at.
Yes, and you know, but the older I get, the more comfortable I do feel about that, you know, that you know. Incidentally, I went down to the shopping centre before I came in here, and that's what I can do. I can go and have a look at the town. Nobody really bothers me, and I sat in Costa Coffee, and you know, I'm not a famous person, but occasionally I get recognised. Yeah. And of course, this was the one time that the girl passed and said, I gave birth to you, so I've got to say hello to Nikki, who I just met down in the shopping centre.
She recognised you?
She did.
Really?
Yeah. Well, I can tell because they look at you and they smile, and I kind of go, oh, okay, here we go.
She gave birth to you, mean your music was playing while she was giving birth?
My music, sorry, yes, let me. She didn't give birth to me, no. But her music, so I mean,
how wonderful. Is she listening now?
Amazing. You know, and that's the power of music.
Hello, Nikki.
It touches people, you know, and there's nothing more, you know, it's very informal. Hiya, how you doing? By the way, I gave birth to your music, you know, and that's great. It's such a brilliant thing.
I bet Wet Wet were there at the start of many births as well, 9 months previously. Why did Wet 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 break up?
Well, you know, I think it's hard to kind of look back, and because I mean, when we first started, we were sort of breaking up almost on a weekly basis, and I think when you've got kind of lots of big personalities in the one place, you know, everybody's pulling to get their own way, and that creates the tension of the band, you know, and that's what. That's the sort of creative bed that you can build your songs on and build your creativity on, you know. So, you know, it surprised me that it lasted so long, but I think, you know, we started running fast very early on, and when you run as fast as we did, there's always going to be something that trips you up.
Was it like the couple that met, fell in love, got married really quickly, and then the marriage kind of ran its course because they didn't quite have time to get to know each other in the first place? You know,
in a sense, but you know, I would have to say that although it looks on the outside as if, you know, we formed, we created the band, and then, you know, we went out and we were successful and everything happened. You know, we had 2 or 3 years where, you know, we went and cut our teeth. We learned how to, you know, be in the studio. We learned how to go and play live, you know, which brings me nicely around to nowadays. You know, you're on a Saturday night TV show, and you've got 12 weeks, and sometimes that can be your career, you know. So I mean, in terms of that, it's kind of frightening. I feel for these guys and the girls that go on these shows, because we were lucky. We had time to go and develop and find out who we were, you know. So, you know, when we eventually got to release records, we were in a kind of little bubble, but not as big a bubble as kind of maybe these guys
you really
are in.
Found
you know,
your feet. We will talk about your solo career and obviously your upcoming date at the Stables, but I just want to touch on another major part of your journey. You used the word journey, and I think it's an appropriate word with you. And as is often the case when confronted by major success, you found yourself turning to drink. And I've read it that it took you many years to actually realise you were drinking too much. Why do you think, looking back, that drink became such a big part of your life?
No, I think I knew very early on. I was
Really?
drinking too much, you know.
Yeah.
I think that, you know, there's a lot of different things, you know, and I don't want to tar Scotland with the kind of ill man of Europe, as it's sometimes known, you know. But certainly where I grew up, it was, you know, when you became of age, you went down to the pub and you drank, and it's a cultural thing, certainly. Well, it's not really a cultural thing, you know. I'll come back from that, you know. It's, you know, basically what alcohol, I think, did for me was kind of, you know, made it easier to be in situations, you know. And I hear that a lot from people, and certainly for me, you know, like coming here. Now, you know, years and years ago, I would have probably came here and maybe to settle the nerves, I would have had
drunk.
a drink.
Yeah,
you know, I would have had something to just settle that down, and you know, suddenly it becomes a bit of a crux, and suddenly it's on a daily basis that these things happen. So I mean, I kind of knew that, you know, if I didn't watch what I was doing, then this was going to overtake my life. You know.
How did you get clean?
Well, basically, for me, it's abstinence. You know, I can't really do any of that stuff anymore. I can't do any sort of stuff that will change the way I think. You know, and alcohol certainly. You know, when that passed my lips, it changed me. It changed my personality and changed who I was. You know, and made me what I thought extremely handsome, quite witty, and all these things. But you know, I think eventually, once you do this and it becomes really boring, you know, it takes all that away from you, you know, and you're left with nothing, you know. So
And you do have a very strong wife as well, don't you?
I do, and she's played a big part, you know. She's played a big part in kind of in getting me together, you know. And you know, I couldn't do it without her. You know, that's the whole thing. I think behind every, you know, that there has to be a strong woman, and yeah, absolutely.
I got one of those at home as well. She is very much the backbone of many of the things that happen in the old cliche.
Gold, you know, yeah,
absolutely.
It's brilliant.
We're talking to Graeme Clark, former bassist of Wet Wet Wet, now out on the road as part of his solo tour. He's going to play us a brand new song for us. And Graeme, it's important to say that Wet Wet Wet, although you broke up and you have now reformed, it's still a very much an ongoing entity. And although you're all living in different parts of the country and doing different things, you do still get together, and you're playing live again this summer, aren't you?
Yeah, we still talk to each other, you know. We still kind of have a conversation, and yeah, we went tour in December there, and you know, we've been doing this kind of sporadically over the last kind of 8-9 years. So yeah, we've got some racecourse gigs coming up in the summertime. That's after the more important tour that I'm doing,
of course,
of my shows, you know. But yeah, Wet, you know, it's a big part of me. I can't deny it. It's and I love it. I love that band, you know. It's great.
We'll talk about your solo tour and this, your life sort of post Wet Wet Wet, or post major era of Wet Wet Wet. You've got a son who's in drama school. Do you spend your days pootling around, writing songs, playing the guitar? Is it quite a nice existence? It's
a beautiful existence. I'm totally blessed where I can, you know, when I look at what other people have to do with a life, you know, I'm the luckiest guy in the world. I have the best job, you know. I come and talk to guys like yourself. I
see, now you're using flattery.
Yes, and I write songs, and you know, I've got my new EP Dry Land that's coming out on the 28th of April, so it enables me to have a life that beyond my wildest dreams.
Your solo music is quite different to Wet Wet Wet, obviously, but it's more folksy, more Americana, touches of West Coast 60s in there as well. Who are your big influences?
I think, you know, there's just so many. I mean, as songwriters, I can't really see by the Beatles. You know, I'm kind of getting more and more into the Stones the older I get. Guys like Leonard Cohen, Bob Dylan, Elvis Costello. You know, I even listen to some classical, you know. So, I mean, hopefully...
So you should. It's
I know.
Lots of pop music and classical music.
Yes, absolutely. And then the thing about classical music, you know, when you were given it or force-fed it when you were a teenager, man, you didn't want anything to do with it. But, you know, as I become older, you know, I find out things like Benjamin Britten that I hated at the time, I'm actually really warming to, all that kind of high art. It's all went in my head.
There's definitely a touch of the troubadours about you, seeing you here with your guitar in hand. What do you prefer, playing wet gigs in front of 50,000 people, or just rocking up with your guitar and playing an intimate venue like the Stables?
Oh, no, you've put me on the spot.
And the answer is?
They're two entirely different things, and I love both of them in equal measure, I think there's a difference, when you're in the big arena and there's lots and lots of people there. It's nice. I'm on stage right, when I come down and there's a couple of hundred people there and I take 3 steps from the right into centre stage, it's a different thing altogether, much more magnified. So in a sense, and people are there listening to you, it's a listening gig that I'm doing at this tour, where I just have my acoustic guitar, so it's quiet, if you want to come and dance, man, I would say go to the race courses. If you want to come and listen, come to the Milton Keynes, the Stables.
I'm going to give you the opportunity to move 3 steps to the left. We'll be hearing Graeme sing live for us.
Across beds, hearts and bucks.
This is Nick Coffer.
BBC Three Counties Radio.
So 1:52, we've been waiting for him to sing live for us. Graeme Clark, formerly, still of Wet in reality, but this is his solo stuff. Graeme, what are you going to sing for us?
I'm going to sing a song called I Can't Look.
When you're ready.
I can't deal with all this worry. I nearly had to pray. Need some care, your attention, 'cause my heart's racing everywhere. Got myself to blame, a heavy cross to bear, and I might as well be on the moon. Feels like I'm nearly there.
Beautifully done. That's Graeme Clark, his brand new single off his new EP. So he's coming to the stables in Wavendon on May the 9th. It's a very, very, very important date. Let me just remind you, it's my birthday. May the 9th, which is, my word, is my birthday soon, in a couple of weeks' time. 8:45pm for the kickoff. Tickets are cheap, £10 in advance, £12 on the door. Box office at the stables there, 01908 2808 00. That's 280800, and their website www.stables.org for more information on Graeme's concert and all the other great gigs that they've got coming up at the stables too. And if you fancy going to see Wet 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 at the races this summer, the Wet 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 website is www, which stands for World Wide Web, not wet wet wet, although it kind of works, www.wetwetwet.co.uk for more information there. Graeme, what's next for you after the tour and the Wets in the summer?
Yeah, well, hopefully we can go and record some new music. I'll always be making new music because, that's where I'm going. And you can come and check me out on graemclark.co.uk, Graeme Clark Official Facebook, and Graeme Clark 1 on Twitter.
Are you chatty on social media?
I love it. Yeah, I love it. I mean, very random, and this is how this came about, in a random way. But yeah, I love it. I think it's great. It's a great way of getting your music.
It is a very different world to the one that you broke your band in the mid 1980s, mid to late 1980s. What with social media and Spotify and SoundCloud and everything, everyone can get out there and get their music heard, can't they?
Well, it's more of a level playing field for everybody, and even me, and that's why I choose to do it all myself. As I make the CD, I record it in my own studio, I produce it up, I make them myself. And it just suits me, at this point in time. It's great. I love it.
I've very much enjoyed having you in conversation today,
too,
Graeme.
Thanks
it's been a lot of fun. Thank you for coming in with your guitar. Remind me of the name of your new EP, please.
It is called Dry Land.
And you can find that on Graeme's website, as well as his 2012 album called Mr. Understanding, which, if you like your West Coast gentle 1960s stuff, you'll enjoy that album too. Graeme, wish you all the very best in your upcoming projects. And we will look forward to welcoming you. I can't be there because, did I mention what May the 9th is?
No, you didn't.
Did I know it's my birthday?
What's happening on May the 9th?
I can't remember, but I might be turning 41. Graeme, thank you so much for coming all that way from Brighton.